What if the most dangerous weapon in the world isn't a missile, a drone, or a super soldier, but a spreadsheet? Imagine rows and columns, financial codes and legal clauses, all meticulously crafted to bring a nation to its knees without a single shot being fired. It sounds almost poetic, doesn't it? A bloodless war, fought in boardrooms and backrooms, its battlefields not scorched earth, but global financial networks. Every year, it feels like the West and increasingly other powers slaps new penalties on regimes from Moscow to Caracas, Pyongyang to Tehran. We hear about asset freezes, trade embargoes, and travel bans almost daily. They're presented as the go-to solution, the responsible adult's alternative to outright conflict. But here's the thing. A landmark review, a deep dive into over 200 sanctions cases, found something startling. Only about 1 in 3 of these grand economic gestures ever actually achieves its stated goal. Think about that. If they flop 2/3 of the time, why do presidents and prime ministers keep reaching for them? Why do we, as a global community, continue to place so much faith in this seemingly blunt instrument? Welcome to Macro Central, where we connect the dots of the global economy. Today we uncover are sanctions key to economic power and explore how these attempts were done in the past. Section 1. What sanctions actually are. Picture a club bouncer, but instead of guarding a velvet rope, they're standing sentry at the gates of the global economy. That, in essence, is what sanctions are. They're rules, strict and often unforgiving, that scream, you can't trade here, you can't wire money through this system, and you certainly can't buy spare parts for your critical infrastructure here. It's an economic lockout, a deliberate act of financial and commercial exclusion. These aren't some monolithic entity. They come in a few main flavours. First, you've got trade embargoes. This is the big one, cutting off a nation's supply lines. Then there are financial freezes, hitting individuals and institutions where it hurts most, their wallets. And finally, we have travel bans, restricting the movement of certain individuals. Governments from Washington to Brussels love sanctions. Why? Because they offer a compelling illusion, the ability to look tough, to project power, and to signal disapproval without putting boots on the ground or risking the lives of their own soldiers. It's the clean option, a sophisticated tool in the diplomatic arsenal. But if governments love them, businesses often hate them. Compliance departments suddenly find themselves in a labyrinthine world. The complexity is mind-boggling. One wrong move, and a company could face crippling fines. It's a constant tightrope walk. At its core, the idea behind sanctions is deceptively simple. Make life so incredibly miserable for the target country's elite, and by extension its public, that the regime has no choice but to cave to demands. Starve them of resources, cut off their access to global markets, and watch their economy shrivel. The hope is that this economic pain will either force a change in policy or spark popular unrest. The theory is clean, logical, and brutal. It sounds like it must work. So why then is this perfect weapon so deeply misunderstood? And what is the glorious sales pitch that leaders and the public have so willingly bought into? Section 2. The promise. Why leaders think they work. The sales pitch for sanctions practically writes itself. It's a story of elegant coercion. Imagine the scenario. You cut off a country's primary oil buyers, you lock its banks out of the global payment system. What happens next, according to the theory? You watch their GDP nosedive, inflation spirals, shelves empty. The ordinary voters will rise up or the generals will step in. Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo sell sanctions as the civilized alternative to war. It's diplomacy with teeth, a proportionate response. They offer a middle ground, less destructive than bombs but more impactful than mere condemnations. Beyond immediate coercion, sanctions also promise to deterrence. The message is clear. If you invade your neighbour, you'll be the next Venezuela, the next Iran. It's meant to be a warning shot. And let's not forget the powerful moral glow. Sanctions allow leaders to stand tall, championing values and condemning injustice. It's a policy that photographs incredibly well on the evening news. Decisive action, moral clarity, all wrapped up in a tidy, non-violent package. It sounds like a perfect solution, doesn't it? A powerful, ethical, and effective way to influence global events. So what happens when we stop listening to the sales pitch and actually look at the receipt? What do the cold, hard numbers say about this perfect weapon? Section 3. The numbers. A 35% success rate, or less. Now let's step away from the political rhetoric and enter the cold, hard world of economists and political scientists. One of the most cited studies comes from Hufbauer, Schott, and Elliott. Their conclusion: a 34% success rate. At first glance, that might sound decent, but here's where the nuance kicks in. If 34% succeed, that means a staggering 2/3 or 66% outright fail. These aren't just minor missteps. These are sanctions regimes that are abandoned, prove ineffective. It's like a doctor prescribing a medicine that only helps 1/3 of their patients. And then you have political scientists like Robert Pape. He re-examined that very same dataset. Pape reckoned that the true hit rate could be as low as a dismal 4%. Think about that. 4%. It suggests that in the vast majority of cases, they were merely bystanders, taking credit for a job done by entirely different forces. Even the United Nations offers a rather sober assessment. Their own panels estimate that multilateral sanctions trim about 2.3% to 3.5% off a target's annual GDP growth. Comprehensive embargoes can inflict a deeper wound, sometimes over 5% annually. Painful, absolutely. But is it regime ending? Rarely. This creates a fascinating puzzle. If sanctions fail 66% or even 96% of the time, then the small fraction of successes must be incredibly special. What's their secret? What's the magic ingredient that separates the rubber knife from the fatal blow? Section 4. When they do bite. 5 conditions. So if sanctions are mostly a flop, when do they actually work? It turns out they can be effective, but only when the stars align. Think of it like a delicate piece of machinery. All the gears need to mesh perfectly. First, and this is absolutely critical, the goal must be modest. Forget about grand ambitions like wholesale democratization or complete regime change. They work best when the demand is specific, like releasing an imprisoned opposition leader. Second, there needs to be a significant economic and political asymmetry. Put simply, the target needs to be small and relatively broke. Think of it as Fiji versus the entire European Union. Third, the sender must already absorb a hefty chunk of the target's trade. This is about leverage and dependence. If the sanctioning country is a major trading partner, then cutting off that trade creates a real pinch. Fourth, multilateral backing is crucial. One country embargoes tend to leak like a sieve. But when a broad coalition of nations, the UN, the G7, the EU, acts in concert, it creates a much more comprehensive and inescapable net. Finally, implementation has to be swift and decisive. Sanctions work best when they hit hard and fast, before the target has a chance to adapt. When these 5 conditions align, a modest goal, an asymmetrical power dynamic, significant pre-existing trade, multilateral support, and swift implementation, then and only then does the weapon stand a chance. But is this just a theory? Has this perfect storm ever actually happened in the real world? To find out, we need to look at the one case that everyone points to as proof, the one time the stars aligned and helped topple an entire monstrous regime. Section 5. Case Study. South Africa. If you want to find the gold standard, look no further than apartheid South Africa. This is the case that gives proponents hope. By the mid-1980s, the international community had reached a boiling point. The US Congress passed legislation restricting loans and investment. The Commonwealth nations imposed their own set of sanctions. Even economic powerhouses like Japan joined in. The impact was profound. Foreign investment dried up. Multinationals began to divest. The rand collapsed in value. Crucially, the economic pain started to bite hard into the white business elites. They were the ones who had the ear of the ruling National Party, and their message was clear. The economic isolation was unsustainable. Within 5 years, Nelson Mandela walked free. Yet even in this celebrated success story, it's vital to maintain a nuanced perspective. Sanctions were undoubtedly a powerful variable, but they weren't the only variable. Domestic unrest, the aging leadership, the end of the Cold War all played a role. Still, the South Africa case remains a compelling example. It demonstrates that when global banks, exporters, consumers, and political leaders all row in the same direction, a 30+% success rate starts looking plausible. It's a reminder that under the right conditions, sanctions can indeed be a powerful tool for change. But that's the success story. What happens when the conditions are all wrong? What happens when a powerful nation tries to sanction its small neighbour for 60 years and fails? Section 6, Case Study. Cuba, 60 years of failure. Now let's flip the coin. Cuba stands as a stark, enduring monument to their potential for failure. The Washington-imposed embargo began way back in 1962. The aim was clear and audacious: to topple Fidel Castro's communist regime. 60 years later, what do we see? The Communist Party remains firmly in power. The embargo didn't dislodge them. And who bore the brunt? Not primarily the ruling elite. Instead, it was the ordinary Cubans who suffered most acutely. Shortages of basic goods became endemic. Imagine trying to find insulin or spare parts to fix hospital equipment. What went wrong? A critical factor was the lack of multilateral buy-in. While the US maintained its strict embargo, other nations saw opportunities. European hotels moved in. Canadian banks routed payments through Madrid. The target, Cuba, adapted. The sender, the United States, got tired. The policy calcified into a static policy. Perhaps the most ironic outcome is that the embargo became a handy propaganda tool for Havana. The Cuban government could blame virtually all of the island's economic woes on the American blockade. The lesson from Cuba is stark. Without genuine multilateral buy-in, sanctions ossify into political theatre, inflicting pain on ordinary citizens while the targeted regime finds ways to adapt. But Cuba is a 20th century relic. What happens when you try to use this economic weapon against a 21st century nuclear-armed commodity superpower? We are finding out the answer to that in real time in the world's largest and most intense sanctions laboratory. Section 7. Russia 2014 to 2023. The Sanctions Lab. If Cuba is a historical archive, Russia, over the past decade, has become the world's most dynamic sanctions laboratory. The first wave of sanctions hit after Crimea in 2014. Russia's GDP initially shrank by about 2% in 2015. However, by 2021, the Russian economy had largely rebounded. Then came the full-scale invasion in February 2022, and the West unleashed an economic onslaught. Western nations froze hundreds of billions of dollars of Russia's central bank reserves. They imposed an unprecedented oil price cap. Many Russian banks were booted from SWIFT. The immediate result was indeed dramatic. Russia's economy contracted by 2.1% in 2022. Inflation soared to 14%. The ruble initially plunged, yet the ruble stabilized. How? Through aggressive capital controls and the resilience of Russia's commodity exports. Oil still flowed, albeit to new customers. India and China stepped in to fill the void. And perhaps most importantly, Vladimir Putin remains firmly in power. Sanctions wounded the bear, undoubtedly, but they did not kill it. They haven't triggered regime change, nor have they forced a complete withdrawal from Ukraine. This ongoing sanctions lab against Russia proves a critical point. Big economies, especially those with vast resource cushions, can take plenty of punches. It's a sobering lesson, but it also raises a much darker, more fundamental question. We've talked about success and failure in terms of political goals. What about the cost to the people caught in the middle? What is the real human price of this economic warfare? And is it a price we're willing to pay? Section 8. The human cost and backfire risk. While sanctions are often presented as a bloodless alternative to war, their impact on ordinary people can be devastating. Consider the tragic example of Iraq during the 1990s. The UN imposed comprehensive sanctions. The consequences for the Iraqi populace were catastrophic. Harvard University researchers estimated that excess deaths among children under 5 reached a staggering 173,000. Sanctions can devastate healthcare systems, cripple education, and lead to widespread malnutrition. But the pain isn't confined to the target country. Sanctions also carry a significant backfire risk for the sender nation. Producers often lose lucrative markets. Louisiana rice farmers, Bavarian pump makers, Japanese car exporters. These are tangible economic losses. Furthermore, sanctions often create perverse incentives. Black marketeers and crypto brokers thrive. Illicit trade networks flourish. The rise of cryptocurrencies has provided new avenues for evasion. And finally, there's the risk to moral legitimacy. If sanctions are perceived as causing disproportionate suffering to innocent civilians, the moral high ground quickly erodes. When moral legitimacy evaporates, the policy eats itself, becoming ineffective and counterproductive, ultimately undermining the very principles it was meant to uphold. So if this is the reality, if the main weapon in the toolkit is this costly, this messy, and this prone to backfiring. What other tools are even in the box? Section 9. Alternative tools in the Economic Toolkit. Given the patchy record, it's worth asking, what else is in the Economic Toolkit? First and foremost, there's diplomacy. Sustained, skillful negotiation can sometimes achieve what sanctions cannot. Then we have export controls. These are a more targeted, focusing on specific technologies. It's about denying specific capabilities rather than attempting to cripple an entire economy. Cyber operations represent a newer tool, disrupting critical infrastructure, and increasingly we see the use of targeted Magnitsky-style visa bans and asset freezes. They aim to punish the culpable few without inflicting widespread suffering on the general population. Sometimes just the threat of sanctions is enough to shift behaviour. Conversely, if the ultimate goal is outright regime change, history suggests that sanctions alone are rarely the answer. Sanctions occupy an awkward middle rung. They're tougher than a stern talking to, but far less decisive than military action. This uncomfortable position may explain their enduring popularity, but it also explains their often patchy and disappointing record of success. This has forced a rethink. If the giant economy-wide embargo is a blunt instrument, is it possible to redesign the weapon? Is it possible to create a smart sanction? Section 10. The future. Smart vs. blunt. Looking ahead, the trend is clearly moving towards smart or targeted sanctions. The idea is simple but powerful. Instead of starving an entire village, you aim to pressure the specific individuals and entities responsible. How do these smart sanctions work? They might involve freezing the overseas assets of specific generals, banning the children of corrupt oligarchs from attending prestigious Swiss boarding schools, or blocking a specific airline. Early evidence suggests these measures can indeed be more effective and ethically sound. However, even smart sanctions face significant hurdles. They still need robust international cooperation. A Russian oligarch might find their assets frozen in London, but if they can simply buy a Cypriot golden passport, the effectiveness is severely undermined. This is where technology comes in. The advent of blockchain analytics and real-time satellite data are now giving regulators new tools to chase evasion. But here's the rub. Enforcement budgets rarely match the hype. They are a significant improvement, but they still operate in a complex and imperfect world. This brings us back to our original mystery. If the old sanctions are blunt and the new sanctions are flawed, what does that tell us about the very nature of economic power? And why, after all this, do we still keep using them? Conclusion: the true power of sanctions. So after this journey, we return to our central question. Are sanctions truly the key to economic power? The evidence suggests no, not in the way we're told. They are not a magic wand that instantly transforms adversaries into allies. Their power is conditional, limited, and often indirect. So why do we keep using them? The answer is the most uncomfortable truth of all. We keep using them not because they are a weapon of results, but because they are a weapon of signalling. They are the ultimate tool of political theatre. They are the perfect way for a leader to look strong, decisive, and moral, without paying the catastrophic price of actual war. They are a policy designed for the evening news, a way to do something that appeases domestic audiences, even if the real-world impact is negligible, or worse, counterproductive. The next time you hear a politician, any politician, promise to bring the full weight of economic pressure to bear on a rival nation, remember the 35% odds. Remember the 4% reality. Remember Iraq and remember Cuba. And then ask yourself a few critical questions. Is the goal truly modest and achievable, or is it an ambitious pipe dream? Is there broad multilateral backing, or is it a unilateral gesture bound to leak? If the answers aren't a resounding yes, then history strongly suggests that the biggest pain, the most profound suffering, will land not on the strongmen in the palace, but on the ordinary people trying to live their lives. They are the ones who face the empty shelves, the crippled healthcare, and the lost opportunities. Decide for yourself whether that counts as true power, or just politics, with the real cost hidden in the shadows. Thanks for joining us on Macro Central. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one. Remember, when it comes to your money and your economy, knowledge is power.